At this time, our next part of the program is sponsored by the 100th Meridian Bull Leasing. Thank you for that. Now, I'm pleased to announce Paul Dykstra is our next speaker. As a beef cattle specialist, Paul works to ensure the supply of certified Angus beef brand. He shares information and builds relationship with cattle feeders, commercial cow-calf producers, and registered breeders, helping to point to ways to profitably manage and market high-quality cattle. Paul got his start in the cattle business first on his family's commercial cow-calf ranch, and then followed that with an experience in diversified agriculture and earning an animal science degree from Colorado State University. Before coming to the brand, Paul was a feedlot manager for U.S. Meat Animal Research Center at Clay Center, Nebraska. Early in his 18-year tenure at CAB, Paul played an integral role in reaching the feedlot sector, and he previously audited the brand's natural product extension. Over the years, he has helped producers understand more about where value is generated beyond their ranch gates and given them tools to help orient their herd to capture that value. Today, he continues that work and communicates consumer demand signals to the production sector. He also analyzes beef markets and grading trends, which he reports on in biweekly CAB Insider. Paul and his family live in Chapel, Nebraska, where he's teaching the next generation about what it takes to raise cattle that fit in a high-quality target. Help me welcome Paul Dykstra.
Thank you for that introduction, Bob. That's quite a nice way to be introduced when someone else writes nice things about you. It keeps me from stepping in a trap that way. Folks, it's my pleasure to be here with you today, and it's really an honor and a special privilege for me to be down this far south, especially as I tend to stick to my home country up in the north. And I want to tell a little bit of a story on Andy here with that in mind. I first met Andy in November a year ago at the Range Beef Cow Symposium in Nebraska. Just close to my home in Mitchell, Nebraska, was it, Andy, where that was hosted. And I gave a talk similar to what I'll give today. And at the end of my discussion, as I kind of exited the stage, Andy came right up and introduced himself and made my acquaintance and really was complimentary about the things that I had to say. And at the end of that, he suggested that perhaps I come speak at this event. And boy, it made me feel so good, and I was kind of nodding my head and feeling like, yeah, boy, I think your folks do need to hear about what I'm saying. It sounds to me like, and was very agreeable. And then at the end of that conversation, Andy also mentioned that potentially we might have an opportunity to sponsor supper for you here tonight as well.
Thank you, Paul.
So I'll say one thing. Andy Holloway is working really hard to help you folks have a great event and get sponsors gathered up, and that's a big part of this thing. And glad we can finally have it come to fruition after the trouble we've experienced in the last year. But honestly, a pleasure to be here. So many folks here representing the ranching community. I'm sure the stocker community and some feeders as well. Just really my cup of tea to have an opportunity to visit with you this evening. It's been a long day. I hope you're excited to listen as I am to visit with you a little bit more about our program at Certified Angus Beef. So let's get started with that. Matt, I'm already falling down on the job. I'm trying to advance that slide. Green means go, right? There we go. Well, since James Henderson was so graciously speaking about and complimenting our Nebraska cattle earlier, I think complimenting the size, the mature weight, was that not what we were talking about, James? I thought it'd be fun to show you some good Nebraska cows. They're too far away for you to tell what they weigh, but I'll tell you, they don't weigh a ton, James, unless they come in dry in the fall. Some of them might weigh a ton. But few of my cows in that herd, not all of them by any means. But I thought I'd just kind of jump right out of the gate with a statement that I think is really descriptive of those of us that raise a cow and a calf in this business today. And we recognize, I think, pretty well across our sector, right, from the cow-calf production sector on, that, oftentimes the value signals get mixed. There's not much we can do with a calf once that animal's on the ground to add value. We talk a lot about adding value, and undoubtedly, if we apply a vaccination program, we're going to add value to that calf. But really, everything else we might do to that calf is either protect the value that we've bred in or tear it down. Am I right? So when we talk about value discovery and premiumizing cattle and these kinds of things, I tend to be a little bit reserved in that conversation, because what we can really do is simply protect what we've already put the energy into through genetics, and then also manage the cattle in a way that those are revealed. And finally, the marketing aspect is where we get paid, whether or not we're able to differentiate value or not. Okay? So I think fairly basic concepts, but once in a while in the marketing discussion through our industry, some of these signals get a little bit misused and abused. So let's talk about the Certified Angus Beef brand background just a little bit. Some of you are very, very familiar, and some perhaps less so. So I want to start at the less so and work from there. Our brand has been around for 43 years now, founded in 1978, and the mission statement has remained the same from our founding fathers and their foresight in designing this world's largest and first branded beef program. You can read there for yourselves, but the mission is not to win in the beef game or sell more pounds than the competition. The mission is to add value to the purebred Angus seed stock herd in this nation. And has done so, I think, fairly well if we just look at the track record of the brand and the growth of the Angus breed and popularity. And from that standpoint, we've done very, very well. And the cattle have tended to meet several of the market demands, both in production and in that end user experience. So that's the mission, okay, regardless of what we do to try to modernize how we attack the consumer with our product or how we try to satisfy the needs of the market. This is indeed what we need to make sure we keep an eye on, particularly as we get more advanced in consumer expectations, and we might once in a while lose track of that. So lots here on the slide, but just some more background data and just kind of peruse as you like. The Certified Angus Beef brand is a not-for-profit organization, a subsidiary of the American Angus Association. And by that fact, we are indeed working directly for those members, which are essentially the owners of the American Angus Association by their membership. We have a commission-based revenue model. We don't take dollars out of the pockets of ranchers or cattle feeders, but that packer is the first entity that actually capitalizes on our brand being placed on a label. And as such, the packer pays us a small commission on every pound that's sold into a licensed user on down the chain. That's how the structure of the company works. Works very, very well and keeps us growing, but yet any revenue that we may receive has to be spent right back out again into marketing the brand. We only own the trademarks. For example, somebody's got the examples of Uber and Airbnb, no different than the Certified Angus Beef brand here that I wear on my lapel. We own a couple of buildings and some cars, but all of the equity in our company is this logo, as well as the people that, of course, bring a lot of value to the company. 5.5 million heads certified in the latest annual data. Over 1 billion pounds sold globally in the last handful of years. Of course, last year, a small step back for reasons that you're all real well aware of in terms of the slowdowns in the packing sector. We're working across 19,000 plus companies, from that licensed packer to distribution to retail and food service, and internationally in 52 countries. So global reach from that standpoint, with $92 million in premiums paid back to cattlemen through those grid premiums and other incentives that packers have paid to feed yards for cattle that meet our requirements. That last point's the one I'm the most proud of, and the reason I'm here with you today instead of jumping ship long before, because we are adding value for cattlemen. Talk a little bit about the mechanics of the program. Again, perhaps old hat for some, but maybe new information for others. I've had folks today come to me and say, how do I enroll my calves in the Certified Angus Beef program? As such, we need to have this conversation to understand the mechanics, because no live cattle are actually certified for our brand. It's a carcass-based program, and the cattle those carcasses need to meet our branded requirements in order to be accepted. So as much as I'd like to sign you up and have you follow some protocols at the ranch or at the feed yard, it's a carcass-based program, and we have to wait until the USDA certifies each carcass. So those cattle need to come through the system, through feed yards into our licensed packing partners here in North America. And you can see the geography here. No surprise, we all know where the feeding sector is based. We all know where the packing sector is essentially based. But we do have some tentacles even in Canada and then on both coasts with the packing structure in those areas as well to handle some of the supply. So accessibility is very, very good. Depending on where you feed cattle, we can probably get those animals harvested at a licensed facility. These are the brands of the company names of our licensees. We are licensed in about 85% of the packing base in the country by volume. So again, we're touching the majority of the industry from the standpoint of who can participate and who can make product for our brand. Let's talk a little bit more about some of those basics in terms of cattle that are qualifying. So the word Angus, of course, in 1978, if we looked at hide color, meant much more than it does today in terms of identifying animals that are Angus or highly Angus influenced or not. And you're all pretty well in tune with that fact. But today we still have that hide color eligibility where those cattle need to be predominantly black hided from the shoulder back and the flanks up, with no color crossing the midline section of the back as well, excluding the switch of the tail. So this pretty well captures those black-hided cattle because animals like that one on the bottom right are pretty few and far between if you drive through the country's feed yards and ranches. But those top two animals, blacks, black baldies, and stocking-legged cattle are eligible and traditionally have been identified as Angus influenced by some percentage of genetics. And the bottom two animals, although that guy on the left may have an Angus sire or dam, more appropriately, still ineligible based on color, okay? So that's just the live eligibility and a very low bar in today's environment for those animals to cross because about 70% of all fed cattle are indeed black-hided by our definition. Just the low bar of entry, but more importantly, the carcass specs, which are coming up soon. When those animals walk into the packing plant and once they're hung on the rail, that hide is removed, we identify those to keep track of them through the system by traditionally that A stamp for, guess what, Angus on the rump, to now more commonly where packers are putting some of that food-grade purple ink on the hock of the carcass, which is not putting color on the more edible rump of that animal in the round, okay? So just to keep track of them through the plant, that's how it's done. And by the way, the USDA is the third party that verifies that carcasses meet our standards. So it's not us in there yaying and naying on people that we like or don't like, what have you. It's the USDA third-party program. These 10 carcass standards, while I'm not going to stand here and drag my feet through each of them, these standards are where the rubber does meet the road when it comes to eating quality and when carcasses are accepted or not. It's because if they're black-hided and eligible, they either pass all 10 of these, or if they fail any one, they will not receive the stamp for the Certified Angus Beef brand, okay? So a lot to read through there, but I'm sure you've had a good chance. And you can see the red on top is there for a reason, which I'm going to show you in that modest or higher degree of marbling, otherwise the upper two-thirds of the choice quality grade that's been, terminology used a great deal in our industry for many years as a signifier of additional quality through higher than just low choice marbling, okay? So that marbling needs to be medium and fine textured. Cattle need to be A maturity, no big surprise there again. A 10 to 16 square inch ribeye area, window of acceptability to maintain uniformity, as well hot carcass weight no greater than 1,050 pounds, which folks, that's an awfully big animal when we get towards the top of that carcass weight range, despite the fact that we've seen too many of them surpass that in the last 18 months, right? 1 inch or less back fat is the maximum, and I stress to folks, I didn't say that was the target. That's the maximum. I'd rather see you down at 6/10 of an inch in terms of an ideal target as well. I'm going to let you read those bottom 3-4 items, which we shouldn't have too many issues with in cattle that are pretty well geared to fit into our program, okay? So after that's all said and done, we've got eligible animals identified. We've applied 10 standards by the graders. 36% of those eligible, or what we call in the industry, black-hided animals, are actually accepted into the brand after passing those 10 specs. Okay? So the bar is relatively high, although we've just completed 9 straight weeks of 40 to 42% acceptance rate, which is what we call this percentage right here, which is an all-time record. So a pretty richly marbled set of cattle coming through the pipeline today. And I think we all understand we've got more days on feed, more carcass weight, and more age on some cattle than we've had in the years prior due to this scenario that we're facing in the fed cattle sector as a result of some of that backlog and the unseasonal placements of cattle last fall, et cetera, right? Okay? Finally, then, I promise we'll move on to something more exciting than just the specs, but I want to share with you the importance of marbling and why we stress that. And these are the top reasons why animals may fail to meet our standards. In the top left, a little tougher to see perhaps in the photos, but 92% in 2015, we looked at more than 5,000 carcasses in terms of line-by-line detailed data on individual black-hided eligible cattle, and over 92% of those that did not meet our standards fell short of the marbling spec. Okay? Pretty big deal. Okay? Next, upper right, ribeye size, 11.2% fell either below or above. I'm going to suggest it was above, especially in 2015 when carcass weights were similar to where they are today, really, really high. And then over 1,050 pounds, over 1,050 was 9%. And finally, in 2015, 3.5% exceeded the back fat measure. You'll look at these numbers and say, well, Paul, that's more than 100%. And that's true. Some of those carcasses were offenders for more than one reason or fell out for more than one cause. That's why that's the case. Okay? Well, I'll take a breath then and change our thinking about why am I even discussing this with you. Perhaps you're thinking, good for you folks. Hope your brand is successful and have fun with it. Well, why is it relevant to you, you cattle people here in the room? Well, we talked a little bit about that disconnect of messaging, or perhaps where we're marginalizing value of calves. And now I want to bring us back to that conversation about the value that comes back through the market based on carcasses that fed our program, or even programs with higher marbling standards or that are very similar. And this statement is very, very true in today's marketplace. I spend more time than I want to looking at cutout values and the prices of middle meats, end meats, and all of those subprimals and those trends. But I've come to realize and learn that even though I'm a cattle guy, this statement really drives value from that packer's perspective. Now, we can all say, hey, the packer's not sharing very much of that with us today. And that's true. But the signals are still built in the market and still being realized this week and next week and the next, regardless of whether cattlemen are getting our share or the packers are getting more than theirs, that kind of thing, okay? To display that, this is the key slide in the presentation, which we've got those cutout values for the year 2020 here on the screen. Select, Choice, and the Certified Angus Beef brand on the top row, and those cutout values. So what is the cutout after all? Essentially, if we take that carcass apart and put it in boxes and we price it, we've got prices for each of those cuts that are different, right? A ribeye is not the same as a flank steak, is not the same as a pound of hamburger. If we roll that all back up and put it back on the carcass according to the proper amount of weight and the proper price per pound, that's the cutout, okay? It's pretty simple, but maybe we hadn't thought about it very much from day to day. So these cutout values show a staggering difference in 2020 with a $10.40 Choice Select spread, which historically would have been good at 8. But more importantly to us, the Certified Angus Beef spread above Choice is $17 and change for the entire year average. Today, it's right there again, $16 and change today. So the value spread on an 880-pound carcass, so a per head basis, is listed across the bottom. This is where we can start to put things in terms of what we as cattlemen can think about dollars per head. So just visually, and I think we can probably roll on through because you folks are definitely keen on, I'm sure, the marbling grades, but reading right to left instead of what I like to do is left to right. But Select on the right and then moving on up as we add marbling into the Choice grade, broken into 3 pieces of choice, which is low, average, and high. And then on up into prime, you can see the certified Angus beef brand where our brand lives, which is upper 2/3 choice as well as prime. I'd be remiss if I didn't give some credit to yield, right? Because we've got to have cattle that have a high red meat yield and hopefully less of that external throwaway fat. Been a challenge in the last 18 months as well. But there's some value associated with higher lean meat yield as well, isn't there? Or less external fat thickness. So yield grade 1s being the leanest and yield grade 5s, those with the most external back fat. You can see the values in 2020 on the USDA report across the packers. Dollars per hundredweight, a yield grade 1 pays pretty well, doesn't it, at $5.43? About 6% of all carcasses were yield grade 1 last year. So while that's a good carrot to pursue, it's not reflective of the industry today in terms of the product that we're producing, is it? Some of that's genetic selection in terms of selecting cattle that will grade and will have some marbling, and some of that's feed yard management, days on feed and carcass weight, right? But the fact of the matter is that yield grade 2 is much more realistic for us to pursue, and with a $2.42 premium per hundredweight, the carrot's a little smaller than I'd like to see it. Moving on quickly then, what are the trends in the feed yard industry? So again, I want to make this relevant to you. So your customer, if you're not a cattle feeder and you are a cattle raiser, your customer is the feed yard throughout this chain of custody, right? So whether this is good or bad in your opinion, I won't give you mine, this is the fact of the matter today, that feed yards sell more cattle today than ever before in a marketing format that rewards grid or carcass quality. Formulas primarily include a grid that is not negotiated as well, that top line. So feed yards, good or bad, are valuing cattle when they sell them to the packer on a carcass merit basis. So whether or not you're being paid for that, they certainly are. And as a result, what are they going to buy? Or where will they premiumize, the cow-calf producer or stocker? They're going to pursue cattle that will achieve higher dollars on a grid basis. Visually, I like to think in pictures myself. This is the grid, right? On the left side, we have, the old quality grade scale. I've inserted the certified Angus beef brand there appropriately where it belongs. And then the yield grade scale across the top. So we want to put more animals from the pen up in the upper left corner, and we don't want any in the bottom right. Okay, pretty basic stuff, but it helps to get a visual. So that's the grid, and that's where we're deriving value. We want the best combination of yield as well as quality. Historically, since about 2006, we have responded very well as an industry to the signals the consumer sending back to us through the cutout. Okay? We have improved the percentage of choice cattle and prime grading cattle monumentally in this period of time of 15 years or so, historically in this very brief amount of time. And we've gone to where today, say, the prime grade is about 12% of the total, double what it was in 2015. Double what it was in 2015. That's a pretty big deal. It's not all extra corn and feed, folks. We've made decisions as a collective to make cattle better genetically, and that's pretty exciting. Same thing for the choice grade. But through all regions, although we differ from north to south, as we always have, all regions have improved from a quality perspective. And rightfully so, because the choice select spread, which is the foundation, regardless of whatever breed you prefer, the choice select spread is the foundation of grid marketing and value discovery. We hear it on the radio every day, don't we? The choice select spread was up or down. And you can see the 5-year data, most recent 5 years, there's incentive there, particularly in the spring and fall. And it started out this year rather good, although it's taken a dip in the last report. This is the foundation of that whole discussion. Well, the certified Angus beef brand, we've enjoyed the improvement in cattle and the influence of Angus genetics in our conversation. We've enjoyed a higher and higher acceptance rate right along with the improving quality grade as well. Okay? The additional volume of carcasses meeting our standards has not degraded the premium over time. I have for a dozen years worried about, we're going to saturate this market with too many high-quality carcasses. There aren't enough consumers that want to pay for a higher quality piece of meat. Well, the data suggests that, yes, there are enough consumers. Matter of fact, we've trained them to understand that they should pay more for a better piece of meat, and they've responded and done so. You can see the premiums that the packers are paying on grids have improved over time. Granted, those lines are wild, seasonally and weekly, but the highs are higher most recently, and the lows are higher most recently as well. So this is a trend I can get behind, where we're improving cattle dramatically in a very quick fashion, and the premiums are not only staying the same, but getting a little bit better. I can promise you this is my swan song, so hang with me, but I want to convince you that this is reality and not my opinion. And the reason I can do that is this. You know, when I think about fed cattle trade, I think that should be one of the most pure pricing discovery pieces of our marketplace, and we know that it's not working as well as it should today. However, when I think about, does our brand matter, are we relevant, I compare it to the weekly cash trade, which is absolutely supposed to be the baseline, and that's what this data here does. I've adjusted the Choice Select spread plus certified Angus beef premium into these prices. So on the 5-year average, you can see the monthly dollars per head average that packers paid based on grid premiums for cattle that meet our program. Now, whether that's certified Angus beef or whether you're selling an animal of a different color or brand, if they're achieving some of these marks, you're probably enjoying some of this up in the market if you're a grid marketer, okay? Not my opinion, that's the USDA data. Finally, I want to tell you what we're thinking about as a brand for the future, because we've sure had a really good run for 43 years with upper two-thirds choice and barely messing around with some prime that was really non-existent for most of that period. But now that we've got 10, 12, 14% prime, in Nebraska 2 weeks ago, 17% prime, we can see growth ahead of us in our branded prime product that not only meets our standards, but exceeds the marbling spec in the fact that it's also prime grade beef. We've got enough of that product in volume that we can now go out to the marketplace and say, hey, retail chain, there's enough here every week of the year for you to commit to that product and not just leave it for seasonal buys when supplies spike and then go down. So we're excited about that, and we think there's quite a bit of future. We know that consumers want to eat prime beef, not all of them, but certainly a proportion of them. And folks, it's not under our brand name, but if you look at a company as large as, say, Costco, a name that everybody's heard of, how much prime do they buy in a year? They're a volume buyer of prime beef, and they sell a lot of it. If you can do that in Costco, think about all the opportunities that retailers that are a little higher grade, a little finer kind of an environment, as well as the restaurant trade that's coming back. Finally, you know, if you want to know how do I get more of my cattle to do what you're promoting, Mr. CAB, I'm going to tell you that we do put out some recommendations because people ask, how do I do that? From a genetic perspective, it's a very simple equation. I'd say select for more marbling. Now, at the same time, I'm not going to tell you only select for more marbling. I did not say single trait selection, but if you're going to put a target on it, I would recommend using our targeting the brand requirement level, not requirement, but recommendation of a plus 0.65 marbling EPD in the Angus breed, as well as a dollar grid carcass index of plus 55. These aren't absolutes. These are recommendations that should push you in the right direction. You can certainly choose for much more elite genetics if you so choose. Last year, there were 133 Angus bull sales in the country that used this logo next to yearling or 2-year-old bulls that they were selling to identify animals that met or exceeded these recommendations. So some folks are actually implementing this in their bull sale to help their commercial customers kind of lead them down the right path. Finally, if you're interested in my line of talk or any of the data or ideas that I'm talking about today, put your phone right up there and just cover that screen. It'll take you to the website. You will be asked to input your email address because you're essentially giving us permission to send you an email. Every 2 weeks you can get the CAB Insider newsletter. I won't be offended if you don't want it, but it's there for your liking if you choose. Andy, with that, that's all I've got. Do we have a moment for questions?
We do, yes.
Are there any then? I'll field some. Not too hard, though. It's getting late in the day.
I do have a question for you. Angus breeder, cattle feeder. They've upgraded these Mexican steers crossing the river coming in black. Are they going to be CAB certified cattle?
Without ever seeing one myself on the rail,
I've got a neighbor that runs a lot of Mexicans, and they're
The question is, some of the Mexican cattle coming into the country have been upgraded, I presume genetically upgraded. They're black and good cattle. Because they're of Mexican origin does not disqualify them from our brand. That's the simple answer. Yep. Anything else?
So, Paul, I had the privilege some years ago to go to Worcester to the CAB headquarters and go through the 3 or 4 day training about CAB that was something I'll never forget. But one of the stories I'd like you to tell is how in 1982 the American Angus Association just barely voted to keep CAB as a brand, and in that year they sold just not very much beef. And of course it's been many years since I was there, but by the time I was there they were selling that many pounds every day compared to that first year. So tell that just a little bit, because in my mind the CAB brand, whether you're in Angus or not, has changed the whole beef industry. I think that's an interesting, quick story.
I imagine a lot of you heard Andy, but to quickly reiterate, Andy's talking about, he'd like to shine a little light on the history of our brand. And fortunately, I am young enough that I wasn't there in those early days. 43 years ago in the first year. But 1982 is the year that Andy's quoting, and I apologize, I'm not a good historian from the standpoint that I don't like to focus on the year that the brand was almost canceled. But you can imagine, as the first ever branded beef program, the fledgling years were a struggle, and there was a need for a board vote based on financials and the struggles that were occurring in 1982. Very well could have been the year, you're probably right, Andy, that there was an American Angus Association board vote whether or not to kill the program or keep it. And the keep it, fortunately for me and for many of you, I think, won out only by one vote. And there's nobody wants to admit that they were a dissenting vote that was on that board. Some of them aren't around, but it was quite fortuitous that the brand was not canceled, because as you mentioned, the brand has been good for the beef business. And there's been a lot of things occur over the years as branded beef has become more of a thing. And for instance, you're all pretty aware, I think, of Angus confusion in the marketplace and how the word Angus has been used. And it's a little bit causes some consternation, and certainly for our staff. But the point of that, what has happened, I try to keep a positive approach to that, which is we have sold consumers on the idea, at least in the case of Angus brands, that they should look for that, and that makes them want to buy beef, and it's a premium, even though it's not always, because there's Angus of every level of quality and every different level of specification, and that's terrible. But yet it creates a buzz and it creates some marketing, and we all know as long as somebody's talking about you, good or bad, it's probably helping you market your product. So there's been some overall lift and awareness that beef can be differentiated based on traits and qualities. Granted, we want our brand to win, but in my mind, if every one of you is more profitable with your breed, with your production model, because of something like certified Angus beef, I'm going to have a hard time being upset about it. At the same time, I'm adding value for the Rooneys, I'm adding value for the Hendersons and Bradleys from the standpoint of, our mission statement, adding value to Angus.
Everybody good? One last question.
What's going to have to change for the packer making $400?
You asked for one too many questions, Andy, all of a sudden. So the gentleman's question is, what's it going to take to change the Packers' position where they've got $400 to $500 leverage, right? Margin that we'd like to see spread more fairly down through the sectors. I'll give you the only answer I know, which I think keeps me really my nose clean, which is we must reach equilibrium between hook space and cows in the country. That's the only math I can figure. Everybody may have a different thought about how we might attack the problem, but there's one that through an economic signal is very natural, and it's to reach more equilibrium. Whether that means more hook space or fewer cows or both, we'll see pretty soon. Thanks for the question.
So Paul and Certified Angus Beef sponsored our prime rib dinner tonight, which was CAB. If you enjoyed it and you enjoyed his presentation, let's give him a big round of applause.